Hello and welcome back to atthesymposium.org, where we talk about the intellectual life and academic things. If this is your first time on the channel and you like the content, please like and subscribe. Today I'm going to touch on a topic that kind of relates to a topic that was requested by one of my viewers, which was wanting me to touch on how to look at logical fallacies within arguments. I haven't forgot about it, but we're going to do it. I'm going to do it hopefully this coming week. I'll be able to have that video out for you. But there's another subject that kind of relates to that topic that has been on my mind, and I thought I'd touch on it here today. So it should be a pretty quick video, but it kind of relates to how do we find the holes in someone's argument, or how do we observe arguments, whether in a textual analysis or in a conversational setting. One of the ways to do that is, as I talked about in the previous video, is to see where they're arguing from, if they're making an emotional argument or an economic argument, and then what kind of philosophies are they using within that kind of argument to make their point. Now, in the video that I'm going to make talking about argumentation, I'm also going to mention some of the more popular fallacies. If anybody's aware, there's about 10 or 15, depends where you get the list from, but about 10 or 15 known logical fallacies that are made very often. Some of them are very well known, like the ad hominem, red herring, for instance. Those pretty well known, but I'll go over those and then we'll talk further about how to denote flaws in arguments. But there's one in particular that's been settled in my mind for a couple of days. So again, I thought I'd talk about that. And it's what I call, it's not an official fallacy, although it kind of relates to some of them, and we'll talk about that in another video. But what I like to call the fallacy of historicism, or the historic fallacy, you can say. Whereas there's a certain way of thinking. This is something I very well witnessed in and outside the academy, mostly in the academy, actually even with what we call our chairpersons. So when I was in undergrad, for my senior year, basically you have your senior thesis, and at a lot of liberal arts schools, it's very common to do a senior thesis, and you have what you call your chairs or committee members. And those are people, professors that you select to be on your committee. Basically, your committee or chairpersons are just people that work with you, review your work with you, and critique your work with you, just as you would do in a PhD program where you'd have to defend your thesis. You'd have to do this just at the undergrad level, but it's the same thing. Usually you'd have at least 2 people. You could even go up to 3. When I was doing my thesis, again, I was an undergrad philosophy student. I had a philosopher and I had a historian. Now, having the historian on my committee didn't last that long, and I ended up replacing the historian with a psychology professor. Now, one of the problems that I found, and I found this in the academy again and outside of it, is those that have a bent towards history tend to fall subject to this fallacy. And again, it's something I witnessed when I was there doing this work, doing my senior thesis. And the fallacy of historicism is really a fallacy of thinking in a linear fashion. So, and I'm not saying that all historians do this, or historians cannot be trusted, or anything like that. It's just, it's one of those lines of logic that we should try to follow when we're listening to or analyzing arguments or debates. And the line of thinking here, the line of historicism, the fallacy of historicism, is that you think that because A happened, that B should follow. Okay? It's a very linear way of thinking. To think that because the event A happened at some point in history, that it logically consists that B should happen sometime thereafter. this is a complete logical fallacy. I hope that it's easy enough to understand why that's a logical fallacy. There might be many reasons, maybe more reasons than I can come up with just off the cuff at the moment. But I think the biggest reason that stands out to me is just like, for one thing, life is mostly irresolute a lot of the times during eras of conflict. And when we're talking about history, we're usually talking about conflict between people or conflict between nations, conflict between countries, nation states, what have you. Okay. Most conflicts in life, not just in history, not in academics, most conflicts in life are irresolute a lot of times. So it doesn't naturally follow that B comes after A. It doesn't always follow that there is a resolution towards every problem, every situation happens. A lot of times, again, you can relate this to life. It doesn't have to be something that you relate to academics. If you have an issue with somebody, sometimes it's just a falling out, and right, and it's very well advised and very often advised that, okay, if you have an issue with someone that goes beyond repair, then you leave the situation as it is, right? It's irresolute. You drop the situation, or you don't have that kind of dealing with that person, or et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's irresolute. There's no necessary resolution. Well, the resolution, or you could say the resolution is not to solve it, right? To just leave it as it is, and you go on. And that's very much what happens a lot of times, not just in history, but in life. Now, in history doesn't mean that, okay, that what happened in part A might not come back up, and a nation or certain groups of people might seek vengeance later on and, to complete the part B. But that's, again, you can make the argument also that kind of linear way of thinking is what might cause a lot of conflict in the world, right? Because then the people wanting to respond to A might be doing so in a vengeful manner that might otherwise cause more conflict. But again, this is not to justify or discredit or devalue any kind of situation that has happened in history or is going to happen in our near history that's unfolding, a lot of things going on in the world. But it's something to denote and something to really pay attention to, especially because of what's going on in the world now today, that, a lot of people might be using those kind of arguments with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and what have you. So it's always important to think, again, there is a logical fallacy in looking at things in a linear fashion, that because one thing happened, another thing should follow. This also kind of relates to a big issue that we've had in the academy for quite some time, that actually the psychology professor Jonathan Haidt has been very adamant about addressing, and that's that correlation doesn't equal causation, right? It's the same kind of play there. Correlation doesn't mean causality, meaning that there's something that correlates to something doesn't necessarily mean that that's the thing that caused it, right? It's that same kind of linear way of thinking that can really, really put a hamper on critical thinking, and it's to be advised that, like, if you want to do some really pure critical thinking, that's one of the traps that you want to avoid and not to fall into. Jonathan Haidt, along with some other professors, have actually went into a new venture of starting the Heterodox Academy, which is an academy that's been dedicated to, a school that's been dedicated to circumventing this kind of problem, because that kind of way of thinking has been so inculcated into higher education by way of new theories of the social justice and whatnot, that's very popular in the academy. This new kind of the new progressive philosophies do tend to make that huge philosophical fallacy. And that's one of the things that I always appreciated about being a philosophy student, was that when I would talk to people in different majors and different departments that didn't have the philosophical training, they weren't able to see the logical arguments, the logical fallacies of their schools of thought. And this is where I always thought there was much injustice done to people that were in other sections of the social sciences. They're fed a story oftentimes, or they read books by certain authors about certain events in society and theories about people and groups and such, but they don't have a good background. Before they do that, they don't have a good background in logic and pointing out logical errors. So it's a very important thing. Again, correlation doesn't equal causation, and A doesn't necessarily lead to B, right? So there's a lot of, not only, I don't want to be just cheap and just say, like, it's just a lot of gray areas. It's not just that there's a lot of gray areas. It's just that not everything correlates to a certain result. Not the certain action that you assume might need to follow or should follow after a certain event doesn't really necessitate that thing from being the actual event that may follow or should follow. Right? There's loads of assumptions of thinking, again, that what you think that should happen in B as a response to situation A, there's huge assumptions on what you think that thing might be and why it should be that way. And that has to do with a whole bunch of other reasons correlating to your sense of values, your sense of morality and whatnot. The situation at hand in general. There's so many things. So we can't just conclude that, okay, because A happened, then B should logically follow. And that was one reason, the main reason why during my senior thesis, I had to change one of my chairpersons and get someone else, because I saw that tendency in the historian that I had on my committee, and I've thereafter seen that with many people that I've had conversations with that have more of a background in history, that they tend to make that kind of error. Anyway, I hope you all appreciate the video. I hope it was helpful. Again, I will try to get to that video as soon as I can, talking about the 10/15 major logical fallacies, and we'll talk further about how to find logical arguments or logical fallacies within arguments and within text. This is at the symposium again. Thanks for watching.